Hello everyone! Welcome back to Fixing the Future Education Edition, the online event series in which we are traveling every week through the globe to meet together with the Atlas of the Future, the worldwide experts who are exploring the future of education. Today we will be visiting Professor Mmantsetsa Marope, Executive Director of the World Heritage Group and Honorary President of Indian Ocean Comparative Education Society. Her extensive knowledge and experience as a university professor at the World Bank and at the United Nations makes her someone who can really help us to understand where the future of education is heading to. Therefore, get your questions ready. Put them in the chat because, as you know, after a short presentation from her side, David Bueno, who will be our moderator tonight, will take care to collect your questions and transmit them to our guest. David, who works for making science more accessible to citizens, is a doctor in biology and professor and researcher in genetics at the University of Barcelona. But he's also a scientific disseminator and just launched his last book, L'Art de Persistir, The Art of Persistence, which is an adventure through our brain. So let's start now, and it's time to meet our guests. Welcome, David.
So thank you very much, Sylvia, for your warm welcome, and welcome to everybody that is watching this session. First of all, let me to introduce Professor Marope. Professor Marope, as Sylvia said, is the Executive Director of the World Heritage Group and Honorary President of the Indian Ocean Comparative and International Education Societies. She holds a PhD in education from the University of Chicago, a master's degree in education from Pennsylvania State University, and a bachelor's degree from the University of Botswana and Swaziland. Her professional career includes, among others, 11 years university professorship, 10 years at the World Bank, and 10 years in the United Nations. Her really extensive experience includes advisory and consultancy services to governments, regional economic communities, regional research networks, ministers of education, bilateral and multilateral agencies, and a lot of other different organizations on diverse themes on global education and on early childhood care and development. She is a membership in boards of diverse intellectual and technical groups, editor-in-chief of one of the world's most prestigious journals of education called Prospects, and as well as founder and editor-in-chief of one of the most prestigious education and learning magazines, IBI in Focus. Through her career, Professor Marope has built extensive experience at all levels and types of education, learning, and training systems. In recent years, she gained eminence as a global thought leader on futures education and learning, and on future competencies all global citizens require to thrive in rapidly changing 21st century work and life context. She is an avid advocate for advancing the engagement of the public and private sectors in shaping the future of education and learning, and in shaping, and I think that's really, really important, and in shaping the future through education and learning. So that's one of the reasons that I am really, really happy to introduce her in this Fixing the Future Education edition. Professor Marope calls for transformation of education and learning systems into lifelong learning systems to develop effective lifelong learnings with agility to adapt and the resultant resilience for unpredictable futures. And we know now that our future is more unpredictable than ever. So, Professor Marope, when you want, all the audience is yours. And welcome to the session.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I should start by thanking the organizers of Atlas of the Future for affording me the opportunity to come and learn from you and interact with you. I really do appreciate that. I think as a global education community, we all agree that education is among the topmost global public goods. And as a global public good, it means that its benefits should extend to all individuals, to all countries, and to the world as a whole. We also share and are very familiar with the well-documented benefits of education, of quality and development relevant education. And they range from, productivity and growth acceleration, sharing of growth, because the redistributive effects of education enables shared or equitable growth. They include political stability, they include human rights, justice, social cohesion, and the list goes on. But the ultimate benefit of education is personal and collective fulfillment and peace and enjoyment of life. Now, all these many benefits of education, which I cannot go through them in detail, the important point here is they accrue through learning. So there is a big difference between participating in an education activity and learning through those education activities. So learning has attracted a lot of attention in recent years, but I cannot go into the why of it. It's documented somewhere else. What I want to emphasize is that while we all agree that education is a public good and that the benefits should therefore accrue to everybody, the reality of the global education situation is that a good number of children, adolescents, and youth do not have an opportunity for formal education, which means that their chances of learning, of formal structured learning, are very low. And to the extent that the benefits of education accrue through learning, it means that they are at a high risk of being excluded from these benefits. Some 258 million children, adolescents, and youth do not have access to formal education. On top of that is the 750 million youth and adults who are illiterate, which means that the 258 that I mentioned, and 58 million that I mentioned earlier, will continue to deposit into the backlog, if I can call it that way, of illiterate young people and adults. Now, the most disconcerting part is that among those who have access to formal education, at least at the basic level, which is primary to senior secondary education, some 617 million in estimate, evidence that we have suggests that about 2/3 of them do not learn at the level that is desirable, or that they do not acquire basic proficiencies in reading, in numeracy, in science, and in math. And since these are basics for learning, for instance, if you can't read effectively, it's very difficult to see how you can learn effectively, because most of our learning is text-based. Whether you are reading from an app or you are reading from old crackling of a page, still one needs to be an effective reader to be able to understand what they are learning. And this, the situation that we have education systems that are predominantly failing to enable learners to become effective learners is so disconcerting that we've seen expressions like the global learning crisis, and another expression, learning poverty, creep into our dialogue and into our expression. as the global education community. And therefore, at both the international development agencies, countries, individuals, there, I would say, is concerted effort to see how we can all contribute in our small ways to driving back on the global learning crisis and to reduce this learning poverty, and therefore to enable the majority of global citizens to benefit from learning or to accrue the benefits of education. Now, today I just want to share with you, since learning is the gateway to the benefits of the development benefits of education, and we meaning the global education community, not doing very well in facilitating learning. The effort is then, what are the interventions that can be put in place to increase the pushback on the global learning crisis, or to hopefully eradicate or reach a level of effectiveness in facilitating learning. And today I just want to share with you what I think are among some of the promising interventions that can help us to address the global learning crisis, and that can help us shape a more equitable and effective future of learning. And I want to focus on technology, particularly artificial intelligence, but not exclusively, and on the sciences of learning, and particularly cognitive neuroscience, but not to the exclusion of other sciences. And it is my belief that these two fields, also because they feed off each other, I mean, advances in cognitive neuroscience and in understanding the learning brain have benefited a lot from advances in technology, particularly fMRI and other technologies that enable the monitoring of brain activity during learning. So already technology and the sciences of learning are reinforcing each other. So I think at the meeting point of education, learning, technology, and the sciences of learning, perhaps we can find part of the significant contribution. I wouldn't say a solution, but I would say a significant contribution towards driving back on the global learning crisis and on accruing a better future of learning. Now, starting with the sciences of learning, the study of human learning is very old, decades old. I mean, centuries old, we know that. But I think over the past 3 decades, we have seen more emphasis on evidence-based research on human learning, starting in the 1990s, with the 90s being dubbed as the decade of the brain. And if I can digress a little bit, coincidentally, the decade of the brain, 1990, was also the decade of the Education for All movement, which was, I think, one of the biggest force in driving the opening of access or the opening of participation in education. And somehow these 2 decades started off at the same time, and maybe more parallel than together. And that's what I would like to focus on. Can we get to the intersection of these 2 streams of work? Now, and this interdisciplinary field, the sciences of learning, because it includes many sciences, psychology, philosophy, neuroscience, and so on, is about understanding how humans learn. And in their understanding of how humans learn, hopefully it should shed some light on how we can facilitate learning. There are some examples, or it should at the bare minimum provide insights to the first, what do I call it, frontline facilitators of learning, who are teachers. Give them insights on how they can improve the way they facilitate learning, but also provide policymakers insight on what they can change in order to shape a better future of learning. There are many findings from the sciences of learning that have at least implications, not necessarily direct implications, but clearly connected implications to teaching and learning. I'll just mention very few because the idea isn't to dwell on details here, but to dwell on the broader principles. The first one, the first finding from neuroscience is that we know that once the facility of the brain to learn grows fast, is most efficient during the first 5 years of life. It doesn't mean our brains lose that capability to learn, but those years are prime years, and we've seen a lot of that research feeding into the why of investing in early childhood care and development and early childhood education, because it is at those during those formative years that the investment in building a potential lifelong learner pays the highest dividend. And it pays dividend throughout life, not just during those years. We've also known from the sciences of learning that the environment that one exists in can inhibit or facilitate their capacity to learn. And this means a lot of parenting education becomes necessary, and education of everybody who is in a situation of facilitating young people to become effective learners. For instance, we know that toxic stress in one's environment can inhibit the way they learn. We know that talking math or math talk to young children or reading to young children facilitate their learning of math and their ability to learn how to read later in life. We know also that sleep is not a waste of time in terms of learning, and that we consolidate our learning during sleep. We know also from the findings that automatization of lower tasks like letter recognition and word recognition is very important to spare the working memory for more complex tasks like reading with comprehension. We can go on and on, but the bottom line for me is that the sciences of learning research findings give us pointers on how we can facilitate learning. The difficulty or the challenge is that the interaction between sciences of learning researchers, the people who generate this knowledge and further understanding of learning, their interaction with educators, particularly teachers as frontline facilitators, is somewhat limited to small-scale projects. It's a few countries like Cuba, for instance, where we found that they have taken this work to a very impressive scale. But in essence, they tend to be small-scaled. The impact tends to be limited to those small experimental levels. And yet, the dialogue and collaboration between educators, where it exists, and scientists of learning has seen to bear a good dividend. So my first point is, if we want to improve the future of learning, we certainly have to pay attention to the scientific understanding of learning, and hopefully if we understand learning better, we can better facilitate it, and that this collaboration should be long-term. So that's the contribution of the sciences. The second area, which is technology, is that technology, particularly AI, enables us to address challenges in the facilitation of learning that are extremely difficult or even impossible to address as humanly. And for these challenges, there are many, but I'm going to limit myself to 4 areas: to curriculum, to teachers and teaching, to learning, and to assessment. If you look, the curriculum is supposed to be a guide for learning. The curriculum is supposed to guide what people must learn and how they must use what they have learned in response to contextual challenges and opportunities. And this approach to curriculum, where we go beyond what to learn to what do you do with what you learned, is a way, generally labeled as competence-based approach to curriculum. When Eduardo did his presentation, he shared with you a brief overview of competence-based curricula and shared with you a framework that I developed while I was at IBE on future competences and the future of curriculum. And if we follow that approach, then it becomes very important that we apply what we learned. And I would dare say that while curricula are supposed to guide learning, more often than not, a lot of countries' curriculum look very reasonable, I would say. The challenge is in the implementation of the curriculum. And that's why in the implementation of curriculum, we talk about the curriculum continuum, which is the official or the intended curriculum, what the curriculum was intended to accomplish, the taught curriculum, the learned curriculum, and the assessed curriculum. The unfortunate thing about this continuum is a continuum of diminution where what is taught is generally a little less than what was intended in the official curriculum. And then learners learn some of what is taught. And the elephant in the room is assessment, which tends to assess much, much, much less than what was intended in the official curriculum. Now, what could technology help us with? I think one of the essential contributions that emerging technologies can help us with when it comes to curriculum, excuse me, one of the benefits that the technology can help us with is engaging those who implement curriculum in the process of curriculum design and development. Because part of the reason teachers do not effectively implement curriculum is that they don't share the understanding of that curriculum. They were not part of the design in a very textured way. And when you don't understand something, you don't necessarily commit to it, you don't necessarily own it. But with the technology, AI, and the distance communication we can have, there's no reason why almost all teachers who want to contribute cannot contribute to the process of curriculum design and co-own the curriculum and not just be seen as curriculum implementers. And this could shorten or reduce the gap between the taught and the learned curriculum. In terms of the learned curriculum, curricula are not always developed with the understanding of the different learners and their needs that will be serviced through this curriculum. And what we know is that technology, AI tools exist now that can help learners as they interact and experience the curriculum to adjust the curriculum to the needs of the learners and to adjust it to learner readiness. And that could reduce the difference between the taught and the learned curriculum. Now, if you go further to the assessed curriculum, new AI helps us, AI tools can help us to assess complex competencies like socio-emotional intelligence, which is something which is easier assessed through moment-by-moment observation than through paper and pen. And AI can help us assess these complex competencies, creativity, problem solving, and so on. And in teaching a competence-based curriculum and facilitating learners to acquire competencies, the challenge for assessment is really to create a context that affords learners the opportunity to demonstrate competence, because it's about applying what you learned. And those things that you demonstrate in real life are again difficult to assess through paper and pencil type of examinations, the old style, but through observational AIs and the facilitation of AI, these moment by moment assessment can be done, and we can actually assess learning and close the feedback loop between the curriculum, teaching, learning, assessment, immediate feedback back to the teachers to improve their teaching and back to the curriculum. So technology has a lot to offer, and it is something that we can use. The AI itself also can help us keep curricula current. One of the concerns about the future of learning is that the future's learning should prepare learners for their life, for their future, not for yesteryears or the life of the teachers or the educators who are facilitating them. And AI can help us, even just simple basic technologies like digitization of the curriculum can help us to keep the curriculum current, because the updates of digitized curriculum and digitized curriculum materials is far less cumbersome, it's far less expensive, and we can afford to keep our curriculum current and vibrant, and therefore have curricula that is future forward than curricula that is looking backward while it's preparing learners for their future. The mainstreaming of AI and other emerging technologies into curricula in and of itself is another step towards improving the relevance of curricula, and therefore improving the relevance of learning so that future learning is relevant. Because the learners that we are handling today live in AI-driven environments, and they are likely to work in even more AI-driven and more technology-driven environments. So AI can help us improve the curriculum, improve the teaching and the learning and the assessment, so that we prepare learners who are future ready. And this is quite important and very difficult to do without the support of AI and other emerging technologies. I'll try to hurry since we don't have time. Now, when it comes to teaching, we all know that teaching is what facilitates learning. And teaching is extremely important in this particular, for this particular reason. But it is, most teachers do not, as I said, have the exposure to the sciences of learning that should underpin their practice, or that should at least provide them insights on how they can improve their practice. So extending even through distance learning modes, the opportunity to teachers to be able to gain high levels of functional understanding of the learning would be very important. And distance learning mechanisms can help us to do this. And when it comes to classroom practices, we have the technology now to enhance the classroom environment or learning environment. Doesn't necessarily have to be a classroom, to monitor learning environment dynamics that are very difficult to watch by a human eye alone. If you have a classroom or an environment with sensors and cameras that allow you to monitor what actually happens in the classroom and to provide you feedback, which learners are disengaged, who is doing what, and even suggestions on what you can improve. These are areas in improving learning that are very difficult to do without the support of technology. You know, AI tools can also help teachers gain time, which is a scarce commodity in teachers' hands, by automating low-level tasks. like the administration registers, checking roll calls of students, marking multiple choice tests. But in other countries, for instance, China, the AI applications have advanced to even being used to help teachers grade essays, and this will only continue. But it's not just about grading the essays, it is about analyzing the students' errors, their responses, and creating patterns, real time, that can feed back to teachers so that teachers know what they should focus on more in their effort to facilitate learning better in their classrooms. So AI is not just about buying teachers time and making them time efficient, but it's also affording teachers technical efficiency, because their time and their time will be spent more on higher order learning challenges to address them, rather than get bogged down with low levels tasks that could have been automated. And just like in industry, we talk about smart factories where human-machine interface to improve the quality of production. Teachers can have co-workers, robots, who can work with them as teaching assistants or intelligent assistants that can support learners, like mentoring of learners, providing them individual mentors, so that teachers are able to really customize their teaching to facilitate individual learners to meet their needs, something which is very difficult to do if you are a single teacher in a classroom, if normal classroom, never mind overcrowded classrooms. So these are some of the areas that technology can help with. I think the most attractive thing to me is that technology can really help us more closely approximate learner-centric teaching and learning much more than we could do without the technology that we have today. And this is extremely important. And the constant provision of analytics and feedback to teachers and to learners. The basic psychology of learning taught us a lot about comprehension monitoring, that one of the important metacognitive skills somebody can have is to be able to monitor their comprehension and know when they had a breakdown in understanding what they are trying to learn, and be able to then shout for help in the olden days. Now, with AI, we can actually monitor students' learning on a continuous basis, provide feedback on where they had comprehension breakdowns, and suggest how they can be better facilitated. So I think this is a better approximation of student or learner-centered teaching and learning. We also have now AI tools that provide us the opportunity of what is called embodied cognition devices, where the assessment of one's learning experience or learning journey, if I can call it, is very comprehensive. It's not just listening or observing or reading what the student produces, but also looking at being able to access their facial expression, their emotional changes in their emotions, to be able to signal that this student needs attention. And most importantly, at the end of it, if we can support teachers with the scientific underpinnings of teaching and learning, and we can support them with technology that eases the areas that are difficult for humans to do alone, I think we could nudge forward towards a better future of learning, and a future that can promise more people the benefits of education as we started. Now, technology can also help us advance equity of learning opportunities, because we have technology, for instance, distance learning tools cut out the distance. And we know in many countries, a journey to school is an arduous journey. And also, if you have physical impairment, it's nice for the learning opportunity and the education experience to be taken to you than to you to be expected to go to it. We have the plug-in translators that can limit the barrier of language, that can translate the teacher or the facilitator's language as the lesson rolls out, and limit the barrier, the lack of access, substantive access to the teaching and learning experience because of language. The same with the speech-to-text translation and text-to-speech translations for the visually and for the audio, the hearing impaired. So it's not just about improving quality, it's also about improving equity of that quality of the learning experiences, which is important. I've already talked about assessment. And so ultimately, what I think we need to open up is to really address the inequitable access to scientific underpinnings of learning. So David's type of work is privileged information for some few teachers. And in developing countries particularly, this is not easily accessible. And to also address the inequalities in access to technology and related connectivity, and keep working together for a better future of learning. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you so much, Professor Marope, for this interesting and really inspiring talk. So it's time now for questions. If you have the audience have any questions, please send it by the chat, and I will receive in my mobile phone to ask to Professor Marope. We have received several questions. I have already a couple of questions, but I prefer start with the questions of the audience. So one of the questions made by Dr. Bimal Kumar. Sorry about the names. Most of the names are foreign for me, so I don't know how to pronounce that. But Dr. Bimal Kumar asks, what is the major difference of curriculum in teacher-centered learning environment and students-centered learning environment? So what's the difference between teacher or students-centered learning environment?
Okay, greetings from Kerala. I think Valma Kumar is in Kerala. Nice to hear from you, Doc. The difference between a teacher-centered curriculum, I would not say even teacher-centered curriculum, but teacher-centered educational experiences beyond just curriculum, is when we tend to forget that the only person who can do the learning is the learner. The teacher cannot learn on the learner's behalf, nor the parents, nor the books, nor the curriculum that we provide to them. So when we take a learner-centered approach, everything, starting with the curriculum, has to be adapted to the needs of the learner. And this is why customization is important. But if we take I would say a systems approach, we can develop the curriculum at a central level and just give it to teachers and students and say, implement it as it is. That's even worse than teacher-centered, because even the teacher is ignored and they are just expected to implement the curriculum as it is. If we take a teacher-centered curriculum, is that the system may try to facilitate teachers, but teachers may see themselves as the source of the interpretation of this curriculum the adaptation of this curriculum to their own teaching capabilities, and forget that the curriculum is a guide for learning, and at the end of it, it has to support learners. And teachers, the curriculum and everything else is there to enable learners, and that is our first and foremost customer in education, because without an effective lifelong learner, there is no learning, because as I say, we can't learn on behalf of a learner.
Thank you very much for your answer. We have here another question from this name. It's much more easy to me to pronounce, from Philip Luisa, asking how can AI be incorporated into teaching, learning, and assessment to address equity and address equity at the same time. And we have a second question connected with this one that has been made by Sushanta Choudhary, that she asks if EY is easily used. She says that it's easily used in multiple question tests assessment, but how can it use in descriptive answer sheets? So can be incorporated, and how to use in assessments.
Okay. These are deep questions for, I would say, people who specialize in technology, which I am not. But I'll share with you the first question of how AI can be used to promote quality and equity at the same time.
Yes.
Okay. I think I touched on that point when I was talking about addressing factors of inequity, like distance. It can be physical distance, it can be intellectual distance, like the distance between the sophistication research findings of neuroscientists and scientists of learning, that substantive distance between that knowledge and the knowledge of teachers who are not generally exposed to this knowledge during their teacher training programs. So technology can help to adapt, as I said, the complexity of a curriculum to learners, so that to individual learners in the process of customization, so that each learner can learn at their own pace, and their specific challenges in understanding concepts as they proceed can be addressed by providing feedback to the teacher, who can then interpret that feedback and see how to redesign how they facilitate that particular learner. Other forms of inequalities, as I talked about distance, I talked about hearing impairment, about visual impairment, about speech impairment, about language, shall I say, diversity of language of instruction, from the difference between language of instruction and the language of the learners, are all these areas where AI can be used to limit inequalities in access. Now, in terms of improving quality, there's a lot of talk about AI opening global classrooms. And that means not just distance education methods, but it also means pooling global resources to use them for the benefit of much more learners than normal. For instance, one of the ways to improve quality is the provision of multiple digital resources that are difficult to provide every learner if they were the old physical resources, like textbooks, like learning materials. If these are provided digitally, many more learners can have these, and therefore they can enjoy the quality of the learning experience. There's also, you can pool master teachers across the world to teach the world, to teach global classrooms, and not just teach the 4 kids or the 40 kids in front of them, or 60 or 100, whatever the case may be. We are using technology right now to have a discussion across the world with everybody, joining in. Assuming that this discussion adds value, imagine if we can do this for learners, that instead of being exposed to your teacher who may not necessarily be well trained and so on and so forth, if you had access to a pool of master teachers, this would improve quality. And as I said, close monitoring of individual learners' progress and providing immediate real-time feedback, followed by real-time interventions of helping them. All these are quality and equity enhancing interventions. The second question on how AI can be used to assess, I think we have different levels of AI. We have AI, we have machine learning, where machines, which is part of AI, machines use data available to them over time to be able to learn and to come up with patterns and be able to improve continuously. I think part of the terrifying development of AI is that AI can become closer and closer to human intelligence. I don't believe it will surpass us, or I wish it will not. But there are speculations that we can get to a point where artificial intelligence tools are better than us. And then we have deep learning, which goes beyond the just use of data to learn in the machine learning to using neural data networks to actually analyze patterns and predict problems, or shall I say risks, before they materialize. So it all depends on, and in the regular assessment, we have things called data banks or test banks, where in national exams, we keep asking similar questions over time from these banks to assess learners, and these learners write essays and all, multiple choice short answers and whatever. So if we can have those data of assessment tools, or those banks, I don't see why AI tools can over time be fed with this data to be able to get to the point of assessing these written essays. I have to confess that I haven't seen personally this. I've read about this, and with specific mention of China, that in China, I'm not sure which province or which particular place, China is so big, that about 60,000 schools, are advancing from just using AI to check and mark multiple choice tests, but to also mark essays.
There is another question related to artificial intelligence that I think that you have partially answered the question, but I think that it's really interesting for a lot of teachers. It's from Juraj Tapak, asking that you was talking a lot about artificial intelligence in teaching, but how you see interactions, coexistence between artificial intelligence and teacher?
Yes, indeed, I did maybe answered the question in a very quick way. But as I said in my presentation, in the smart factories, we talk about human-machine interface, where the machines are able to interact with humans in the process of producing products. Machines are able to check the quality of the product, to provide feedback on the quality of the product, and for the humans to continue to refine the process of production. So this is a collaboration. The cobots that I was mentioning, which is a robotic collaborative worker. So there's always this fear that, does this mean artificial intelligence will replace teachers and we wouldn't need teachers anymore? But the more balanced response is that artificial intelligence will complement teachers and support teachers, and not so much as to, how do I put it, not so much as to replace teachers, and that teachers will benefit, like I mentioned, time efficiency and technical efficiency that teachers can gain, but that the teachers can also gain from the ability of AI, the immense capacity of AI to analyze huge amounts of data and very quickly. In this particular case, for teachers, it may not be huge because you have a small number of students that you are working with. But you can imagine if you escalate that to the level of an education system, then the data becomes quite huge. And the data analyst, big data analytics that AI has, the capacity for big data analytics, is a big contribution to teachers, which is not the capacity we have as humans. So I see that the future would be teachers collaborating with students and AI, and not just teachers and AI, but teachers collaborating with students, with AI, and all the three inside this teaching and learning environment.
Thank you. In fact, I was thinking that I am working in cognitive neuroscience and in neuroeducation, and we used to say a joke. It's just a joke, but that we say that how can we define artificial intelligence if we do not know what means natural intelligence? But that's just for another talk. So we have another question from Nokuda Vilakati that says, what are the implications of a future-ready approach to learning on current and future teacher education models? So that's also very, very important. It's the teacher education models. We have another question similar to that, saying that which changes we need to do for the actual teaching of future teachers to adapt to these new technologies.
Mm-hmm. You know, as I said, and it's my bias, I hope, David, it's also your bias, that I think one of the changes that needs to be done in teacher education is to make sure that teacher education curricula and those who facilitate the trainee teachers, that mainly university professors or professors of teacher education institutes, are at the cutting edge of their game, that we cannot afford professors with yellow notes anymore, recycling them over and over the years, and steady, hard and fast and changing courses that, you know, this psychology 101 is always like this. If we want education and learning systems that prepare learners for the future, which we always say it's unpredictable, it changes very fast, then the systems themselves have to be lifelong learning systems in their own right. We can't have fossilized teacher training curricula and expect that they will turn out teachers who can facilitate futures learning. So the teacher training curricula, in my view, we really do have to strengthen the scientific underpinnings of the understanding of learning. I think no teacher should graduate from a teacher training college without a course. Of course, we have in teacher training colleges and in education faculties something called foundations of education, where anybody who graduates in education has learned psychology, philosophy of education, they have learned history of education, sociology of education. But we still don't have the sciences of learning or neuroscience of learning and the sciences of learning. The sciences, other sciences of learning like psychology and philosophy are there, but we still don't have neuroscience, particularly in mainstreamed in teacher training and in education faculties. And I think this needs to be done. as a way of understanding the core business of our industry, which is to facilitate learning. And the second part is that I think teachers also must be exposed to the basic understanding of technologies as they emerge, because one of the challenges with technology is that they change very fast. So we are getting to a point where, for instance, in TVET, it generally is the rule of thumb that no lecturer should be in a TVET workshop teaching who has been away from industry for decades, but that person is preparing graduates to go and join a real life work environment. So teachers have to be kept abreast, and this means that their curricula have to be agile. As I was saying, because of digitization, we can constantly upgrade curricula without going through these expensive, curricular reforms that took decades. And then because now at the pace at which things change, by the time you finish that curricular reform, it will be obsolete already. So the thing is continuous self-renewal of curricula in teacher training colleges and in all faculties of education that produces all educators. I don't care if they are policymakers or teachers. So that would be my disposition, that if we want learners who graduate ready for the future, the systems that graduate them should be future forward. And that is a debate that each country must have. And what does this really mean? What do we lack and what can we improve?
I have one last question that I was really interested in that. It's one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, but there are a lot of questions. So first of all, I want to apologize to all the audience that is making questions that we do not have time to ask all the questions to Professor Marope. But I want to ask you the one last question that is connected with this these curricula that have to be more flexible or more adaptable to changes that you were talking just a few seconds ago. And you told that maybe there is the possibility with artificial intelligence or with the digital systems that teachers can contribute to the curriculum. I have a nice experience on that. 14 years ago, I was asked to coordinate the biology examinations to access to the university in Catalonia. At that time, it was a change of curriculum. I have nothing to do with the new curriculum, but I have to write some orientations to the curriculum. So take the curriculum as something ethereal and put it back to the teachers. And after that, I asked to all biology teachers in Catalonia that they can contribute to these orientations. There are several hundreds of teachers, and I got about 50 answers of teachers making very interesting suggestions on these orientations to the curricula that I think that really improve the work that I did. So do you think that the curricula should be more, how can I say, socialized? That means that all teachers of the area can contribute to the curricula to improve, to make the curricula more flexible, more adaptable to the real situation that are in the schools.
I think that if we are serious about, if we respect the teaching profession, we have to recognize teachers as curriculum developers as well. And I really don't think that any teacher should graduate without a very textured understanding of curriculum design, development, and all the processes of curriculum. Because when you dissociate teachers from the development, the design and the development of curriculum, then you are really saying that all teachers have to do is take it and get on with it. And I think it minimizes teacher agency. It really constitutes an unaffordable loss, because the people who are in close contact with the realism of a curriculum vis-a-vis its implementability, vis-a-vis its realism for learner readiness, whether learners can understand and follow this curriculum, are teachers. And I don't want, really, for me, this division where we have curriculum developers and teachers, and there's a hard line in between them. I think it's a grave mistake because, again, we are having people who have been out of the classroom for decades. Some of them have never been in the classroom, sitting together, coming up with a curriculum. And then, as you say, you tell the teachers, go orient the teachers and let them implement this. I really think that curriculum development cannot be like that anymore. I also don't think that curriculum development is an endeavor of just educators. And I think that time when a couple of educators can sit in a nice boardroom and crank out a curriculum, those days are behind us. Curriculum development has to include the supply side, which are the educators, and the demand side, particularly industry, the innovators, the society, so that, and what you call the socialization of curriculum perhaps, so that the curriculum has a chance at being relevant. I think it's overly presumptuous for educators to think that they can develop a curriculum on their own and that curriculum would be relevant and future forward, because the entities that drive innovation and creativity and all that are many more than just educators. And therefore, it's not about the teachers to me, but I think teachers are prime curriculum developers in my view. If we want their ownership and their commitment, and if we want a high realism index of that curriculum, we have to get teachers as part and parcel of this. The logistics of it are difficult, were difficult, but with the modern technologies that we have, it's no longer difficult to have every teacher who wants to chime in. So that I think really that's, for me, it's without compromise.
So thank you very much. You make it very, very, very clear. So I think that we have run out of time. So thank you so much, Professor Marope, for your talk and to answer all that very interesting questions. There are much more questions, but we have no more time. Next talk that you will did in the future, so you will have a lot of more questions. So thank you to you. Thank you to everybody that has been watching this really interesting session. And Sylvia, now it's all yours. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you, and to you as the moderator, and Sylvia and all the organizers, but most particularly thank you to everybody who joined in this conversation. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Professor Marope. It has been a very intense and very interesting session tonight, but as you know, we have to leave it there. But the good news is that next Thursday we will be here again together to meet Xavier Prats. Xavier is a special advisor of Teach for All, and he will be talking about the future of higher education. So thanks all you for coming tonight. See you all next week, and let's keep fixing the future.